All right. Yeah, welcome back, guys. This is Leaders Fusion for June 2021. And I think me and Sean have been talking a little bit leading up to this one. The subject last time was, what do we go next? We've been doing lots of presentations and things, and where do we go next? And we came up with some ideas last time. I think David was on last time, and he was the only one from last time to this time. So we'll share a little bit about that. And we came up with a challenge with solving a problem, which is how do you get people to go to work when there's an incentive not to go to work? So that's kind of the things we're going to talk about. And I think Sean has some things to share with mental modeling.
That's
So
right. I've got a few things I'm going to share in a book that I'll share with you guys on that topic.
yeah,
The one concern I do have, Brian, just so you know, the two folks who wanted to talk about this, unfortunately, weren't able to be here. So
yeah.
I guess we can talk about it a little bit, but we may have to revisit it at a later point.
Well, yeah, I'm thinking this might be something that we visit for a few months in a row until we figure out an answer, or
Very
until we
good.
run into a wall and have to go on to something else.
Well, and I'll kind of get us kicked off there in that area if you want to.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, you guys heard the question, and it was really centered around the fact that there are a large population of folks right now, unfortunately, that can't find people. They can't find people in their maintenance roles. They can't find people in their Uber driver roles. They can't find people in their office staff roles. It's just, it's become a real problem because, I mean, without getting too political, because of the fact that people can stay at home and make more money under the incentive plans and things that exist today. So that's kind of the genesis of where this came from, and I think we can kind of talk a little bit about motivation and bringing folks in and maybe how to help pull people back into the workforce. But the biggest thing I think for us here in South Carolina is our governor said that we're not going to take any more money and we're not going to hand out any more money. So that means most likely we'll start seeing a lot of those folks come back to work this month. And I don't think that's the case for the U.S. as a whole. But we believe that because they're no longer going to get their incentive to stay at home, that we will see some of them return to the workforce.
Yeah, that's good to hear.
So let's start with kind of a discussion of the current situation where everybody is, so we know where folks are coming from. And I'm just going to go in the order that we're on the screen. So, Brian, what's it like up there? Are you guys able to get folks? Is it a struggle?
Yeah, I don't think it's been too much of a struggle, but the wage here for most positions is higher than what the incentive was anyway. So, we were never shut down the whole time. So, this I don't think we're seeing that particular problem.
Okay. All right. Israel, what are you hearing or seeing from folks in your area, which is right down the street from Brian's area?
That's right. That's right. Well, while Brian was sleeping, I was not. But I just want I just want to remind you that I'm retired. Okay, so I don't encounter or the company that I should work with or worked with. I did not encounter recently this kind of problem. However, what I hear is that it is tough sometimes to get people below, let's say, the college education level. People that are a little bit more educated, there's less of an issue with them for some reason. So,
Very good. Well, thank you. All right, David, I have you next. How are things in your neck of the woods?
Well, I'm in Utah. I think we have the lowest unemployment rate in the country, or right around there. There are plenty of help wanted signs around, and mostly for non-skilled jobs. But it hasn't been, for the most part, what I can see as a huge issue locally in our economy. But I talk to people every day all over the country, and in a lot of the trades that I deal with, it is an issue. They It was specifically uh, when the incentive to stay home seemed better than going out to work, and many people expressed frustration with what you brought up at the beginning. Don't want to get too political, but but they express frustration with the incentive to stay home. So, but locally, yeah, very low unemployment rate.
All right. All right. That's interesting. All right, Chris, what about for you guys?
So I think we're growing a ton right now. So we're trying to get as many people as possible. But I think we're looking for the right kind of person. But that being said, we're kind of in the spot that Brian is, where I think we're offering more than what it would be to just stay at home. We weren't affected too much by the pandemic as far as servicing our customers or taking a break or laying people off, and fortunately enough. So I'd say we aren't running into that so much. And again, we're right here in State College. So Penn State is literally, I'm looking at, Penn State right now. So we get a lot of our engineering talent or, things like that from the university or the surrounding area. So thankfully we're doing okay with that.
Very good. Well, it may be a little bit harder for us to have this discussion. I think we can have it, but I mean, I'm kind of in a similar situation. We're not hiring at that rate. Where I am most affected is when I go out to dinner. And they're not serving lunch anymore because they can't get enough people. So they're only serving dinner. So that's one example. Or if you try to get an Uber around here, you can just almost forget it unless, you really have the time. But, when you look at some of our other folks that were on the call last week, they are directly affected by this piece. So what do you think? I mean, as a group, what do you guys think? What would help pull people in? Specifically when you think about the, cultural things that might pull people in, what works in your organization, even if it's at a higher pay level, what do you think works well?
I think for us, one thing I wrote down, Shon, after you said that was communicating the need to be a part of a team. So right now in 2020, I can guarantee that a lot of people felt isolated. They might have felt like they're either working from home, couldn't get together with people as much. And so I think if there's some way to communicate that team aspect of, come work for a fast, whatever team, like, and getting them back to be feeling a part of something, then we'd be on to something.
Good. So team or being a part of something.
Shon, you may recall my presentation last time.
Yes.
And I was using a term, tribalizing the workforce. And I think it goes along the same thing that was just mentioned. People like to feel that they belong. Mm-hmm. Okay? And if you can make people feel that they belong, you have a better chance of pulling them in. Okay? Now, the other thing that I think resonates with many people, and I'm talking about professionals, okay, is the sense that they feel, let's say, valued potentially, which means it's not always the right thing to have somebody like a headhunter approach people, but somebody more senior in the organization. Let's say if a vice president of, I don't know, SpaceX gets in touch with you, okay, that carries much more clout potentially with an employee than somebody who's just a headhunter or somebody from HR. So
that is a really cool idea. I like that. So instead of just farming it out to the old recruiters, actually having a senior level leader in the organization or the leader in the organization reach out for those individuals. That's something I'd never thought of. Very good.
I think that would be pretty effective. I can tell you how many emails I get from people, and this is like, get out of here. It's a headhunter. It's another, just like, you don't even know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Good. Any other thoughts from the group?
Sold out for a couple of years, huh?
Hey, guys, I have to understand why a person might want to look for a job or come in the first place. I think he's right that, a sense of community or team is important. That's one piece of a larger puzzle. I've got to understand the person sits across from me, because all the studies actually show that pay is not the number one reason a person chooses a job or leaves a job or doesn't
Right.
come back in our case. You know, why is it important to them? To what extent is it important to them? You know, hey, what happens if this is not a part of your life type thing? What changes for you? And so, yeah, that team aspect, but what are they uniting themselves to in the bigger picture? Once I've got them, what's going to keep them satisfied and be excited about coming to work every day? That's what this to me boils down to. I mean, for example, to come build a company right now, I took a 60% pay cut. And I'm excited about what I'm building. Is it a struggle at times? Is my family having to deal with some things that I would rather not have to deal with sometimes? Yeah. But I believe in what I'm doing. And I'm a part of something that I believe is going to make a difference. And I believe that I have the autonomy to make that difference, and that I'm mastering things that allow me to be successful at what I'm doing. So, a couple thoughts there.
Yeah, I agree, David. I took a pretty big cut when I came over to US Steel, but night and day. We couldn't ask for, for better at that point. And this is what I was going to throw out is the whole challenge here is because of an incentive which is monetary, right? So if somebody's offering more money than I can offer for you to stay at home, then what can I offer that's not monetary to bring you back in? And that's, people aren't looking for a job. You have to get them to come, incentivize them to come for the job. So what else can we offer besides money? And I think that's one of the big questions. You said team, and not being isolated and those kind of things. But what else? I think that's where the real discussion has to happen.
I think one of the areas that there is a lot of potential to attract employees is to convey, let's say, a more interesting, more stimulating future professionally. Okay, so one gets hired at a certain level, but if you are able to talk to this potential employee and let him or her know that within, let's say, 2 years, if they do a decent job, there's a very good opportunity, there's a very good potential for them to move up. Okay, and that gets into career planning, which is extremely important. And what I've seen in industry for many, many employees, when they did not have a career plan, they left. That was even before COVID. Okay.
Yeah, that career plan, I think you're right. I think that is definitely a driver for some folks. And I've seen it even, with young engineers that move into organizations. If you can't tell them where they're going to go 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 4 years from now, then it's really hard to keep them. It's a good point.
So that gets back to the why. There's plenty of other people who don't care about that advancement.
That's right.
They just want stability. All right.
Oh, I have an individual. I have an individual right now that is all about stability. That's all the guy wants. So yeah, that's another good motivator. So I guess you could advertise how stable the workforce is and how the fact that you haven't turned over people during COVID. Is that kind of what you're thinking? Being able to give them security in the job itself.
If that's what's important to them. Like I was saying, it's for some, and what we're getting at here is what I was talking about earlier. What is important to them? Why are you joining this organization? What's going to keep you here? There's any number of those things. I mean, when I was going through a master's program and I was doing this with a bunch of master's human resource people who would love a discussion like this, right? One of my favorite courses was or the topics was organizational development. And you cannot separate organizational development, no matter how pretty it looks on paper, with the people that are going to be inserted into the roles and responsibilities of that organization. And if you try to put somebody in there who's not a fit, they may do it for a while, but they're already thinking, where's my next place?
Right.
And there could be any number of reasons that might do that. And, there's all kinds of personality tests, there's all kinds of trait identifiers and other things like that. But I like the suggestion earlier about, a person other than an HR person calling, but no matter who calls, the human connection has to be there. And a person has to feel like I'm seen, heard, and
Yes.
important.
Yes. I would like to kind of refine what you just said, if I'm allowed, Sean.
Please.
Okay, so let's say you don't have somebody who is a headhunter from New York, okay, who calls you cold, and you probably, some people get several calls. It's very, very helpful if the caller knows something about the candidate, the potential candidate that he is calling to. And that has something to do with, let's say, finding out few basic things about the candidate. How can it be done? Sometimes you may have employees that know this person or heard about this person and know his or her background. So when, let's say you are calling somebody, Sean, if you know some details about their interest, maybe their hobbies, how did they do professionally up to the point that you call, that goes a long, long way because it will make this candidate feel, just like was mentioned before, that there's an interest in his background. Okay, so try to find out as much as you can, if it's possible, about that candidate.
I think too, something that we've done is an employee referral incentive.
Yes.
So if you
Yes.
know, yeah. So if you know somebody, there's not a better time to cash in on that because
Absolutely, yes.
yeah, if I get reached out to by a friend and says, listen, this company, you have to work for them and this is why, I'm much more like, I'm going to do it. If I get an email on LinkedIn saying, hey, set up 15 minutes to come talk to me, I delete those all the time. I'm not interested in that. So it's that personal connection. And I think now we can cash in on that because the people that are still working at our companies want to be working there. So we need to be leveraging those people.
Yes, that's what I meant. Yes.
Very cool. Very cool. So I'm going to recap some of the things we talked about and then let you guys add in anything else that you think of. And I was writing fast, so I apologize if I missed or didn't quite get something right. But the first thing that I heard was having a team and being a part of something. You're coming out of COVID. It's been quite some time. We've all kind of been isolated for a while. So that ability to bring somebody back and share with them that there's a team effort and that we're all facing a common goal. And then we heard tribalizing the workforce. And I think that kind of ties right into being part of something, right? Making it a tribe. Then we talked a little bit about feeling valued and a senior leader in the organization reaching out to start conversation with you. And then we piggybacked on that and something we'll get to in just a few minutes by knowing something about the candidate. So I've got that over on another Post-it note. The next one is the big picture. What keeps them satisfied? And you guys talked a little bit about some examples there. And you're right. There's probably a list of 15 or 20 or maybe even 30 different things that satisfy people. And we could probably sit and brainstorm that out. But making sure that you're identifying what their satisfiers are, because it's probably not pay, and then being able to go after that satisfier. Then Brian said, what if they're, offering more money than I can offer? Well, then he said, make it more interesting. Show me what else you can offer me that no one else has been able or could offer me, even at the higher price. Then you guys brought up the whole career planning piece and being able to tell them, hey, you've got 2 years in this role, but then look at these other roles that are in front of you, and you've got the choice to go technical or to go business or whatever the case may be moving forward. So being able to offer them that career path or that career planning side which, many other companies may not be able to offer. And then satisfied, we talked a little bit about satisfying someone with stability. And again, this just looped back, I think, to just another one of the satisfiers that we can use that isn't money. And then, I heard mentioned, and I wrote down trade identifiers, and I think that's probably related to the satisfiers. And I'm sure there's a document or a tool out there that could be used to kind of identify what some of those non-monetary satisfiers are. I feel like I've seen it over the years. I just can't put my hands on it right now. And then the next thing that I believe I heard from Israel was the human connection piece. Making sure that you're actually making a connection with the individual, that you know something about them, that you take the time to prepare and have a discussion about their interests or their hobbies, and that sort of thing. And then the last thing we heard right there at the very end was the employee referral, which is huge, right? Because if an employee is recommending the business to me, then they must really like their job, and I should probably come work with them because I like them. So I think those are awesome. That's an awesome set of suggestions. I think that we can save here for those folks that couldn't be on the call, and then maybe revisit them again the next time we have a call to share it again. Any final departing words on the subject before we move on?
I have something. I don't know if it's departing because I can talk as long as you let me, Shon. So I'll spare you the agony. Okay. It seems like we have a culture in this wonderful country where money is very important. Okay, but almost all companies kind of put it aside. They talk about indirectly. In other words, thinking that money is not the most important incentive for many people, it's inaccurate, okay? So if somebody gets a significantly higher income from a new job compared to another company, they may, depending on what motivates them and so on, but in some cases they may go where the money is. Now, I'm not suggesting to offer more money, but what I am suggesting is when a candidate is being contacted, and this dovetails into career planning. You can incentivize them, not only giving them a vision of where they're going to be, I don't know, 2 or 3 years from the time they start, but there also may be a monetary incentive that comes with this upgrade in position. You follow what I'm saying, Shon?
Yep.
Okay.
You're on mute all of a sudden.
Is it better?
There it is.
Yep.
My wife thinks it's next to impossible. Okay. So I discovered something, but that does 2 things. First of all, you touch on the topic of money, which everybody thinks about, even though it's not spoken. And secondly, you structure it in a way that you give them a vision of how their career is going to progress with some kind of monetary compensation without getting into specifics.
Yeah.
You do not want to get into specifics during an interview as far as the future, because nobody can guarantee anything about the future. But I think it's wise to touch upon it at least. Okay.
Very good. Thank you, sir. All right. So that, I think, gives us a good starting point. Maybe we revisit this on the next call briefly. We'll maybe keep it to 10 minutes or something like that. Share what we discussed on this call, and then maybe add a few things with the crowd. We lost David. It looks like he had a work thing that popped up a few minutes ago. Since there's just the four of us, I'm going to take us through a little bit of the learning models that I've been playing around with, and I'm just going to talk briefly about some examples and ask some questions as I go through it. But I think this is kind of a flavor for what we may be able to bring long term. And the book that I'm going to be referencing to do this it's called Super Thinking. I don't know if you guys can see it, the big book of mental models. And mental models, my understanding of mental models as I learn more and more is that they allow your brain to make decisions much faster than it normally would. And they can be both negative and positive. They can have, negative influences on your decision making. They can have very positive influences. So you really have to look at the mental models you're using and make sure you're making decisions the right way. But the whole point of it was, when we were cavemen back in the woods, if we had to analyze every piece of data that was coming at us before we could make the decision, we would have already been eaten. So in order to avoid being eaten, we learned to make mental models. Bear makes noise. Okay, I run opposite direction. I don't need to think about which direction the bear's coming from, how long he's coming, whether he's walking or running. No, just run the opposite direction. Now, it either worked or it didn't, right? And the ones that died, their mental model died with them. And the ones that it didn't, they are our ancestors.
Shon, I cannot help it, but not everybody likes kosher food.
Oh, so what I did is I went through the mental model book and I pulled up a few, and I actually tried to pull up ones that I felt like we had discussed on previous calls. And we didn't discuss all of these, but we did discuss some of them. So I thought I'd bring them up and just have a brief discussion about each of them and see if you guys like this idea of kind of processing the mental models as we go forward. And the first one, I think is a one that some of us are very familiar with. It's called the MVP, or the minimum viable product. All right. It's what we can get out there to let the market talk to us. And some of the things that they mentioned, there's some great quotes in here and I can't help but read them. So the first quote in here was from LinkedIn's co-founder, and he says, if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your project, you launched too late. All right. Or the first version of your product, you launched too late. And I thought that was a really cool piece. The next couple of quotes really does tie back to some things that Brian has said on previous calls. No battle plan survives first contact with the enemy. The second one, which I think is even funnier, is Mike Tyson when he said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. All right. And so their point was that at the end of the day, no matter what the context is, you're probably going to be wrong with your first assumptions. And Israel, I know you talked about it from a creativity standpoint. There's a lot there to kind of unpack and understand. So why not build that minimum product that would allow your customers to tell you what they think as you go forward? Now, I battle this internal to my own organization. There is a lot of issues where our folks want to let perfection get in the way of being able to move forward. They're trying to go just too far. So I think for me, this MVP thing is a reminder that we need to get out there something we can be proud of, but it doesn't have to be perfect. Mm-hmm. All right. Now, LinkedIn said we should be embarrassed. All right. But I say at least something we can be proud of so that we're not sitting there on top dead center. What about you guys? What are some thoughts about MVP? Where have you used it in the past?
You don't know how good that makes me feel to hear you say that.
Well,
so many concerns I've had, and now it's all gone.
I fixed all your problems with one of my mental models.
Just the first one. Just being embarrassed is a good thing. So I feel a whole lot better now.
Just make sure you remember the quote so you can dig your way out, right?
Yeah.
Well, what about you guys? Anybody used Israel? I'm sure you've used MVP models in the past. Chris, I'm thinking you guys probably have as well, right?
Yeah.
Any success stories or anything you want to share there?
I think for me, it's like one of those, we talked about this a little bit ago of, when you're a risk taker, you're willing to try and fail. And I think this goes into it is you might have something that is not a completed project, but good enough. And listen, I work with all engineers. And I'm not an engineer. So I'm like, full steam ahead, let's get this out. And they're like, whoa, 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 what are you getting out? And I'm like, we'll figure it out when it's out there, So I think there needs to be that middle ground of, okay, it doesn't need to be perfect, but let's roll it out so that we can at least get some feedback, refine it, and keep it going. So I think that's the internal struggle that we have that we're working through, especially when you're in a growth phase like we are, and not waiting till it's too late, having that visionary person that's willing to take that risk, like Israel's talked about before, but then also not taking so many risks it bites you.
Right. Well, and I think it's a good point. I was with a client last week, and they are definitely plagued by the perfection thing. And I don't know if it's fear internal to the organization that they're fearful of the mistake, to laugh kind of at what Brian was saying. They don't want to be embarrassed, or they're fearful of being embarrassed. I don't know what drives it, but I think, and one of the things that we've talked about on this call, and something I hope that we'll visit again, is that emotional safety standpoint. If you can't make the organization emotionally safe to make a mistake, then the MVP is impossible, because I've got to do it so well that nothing can go wrong and we never get off of top dead center.
Yeah.
Yeah, the vision. Oh, go ahead.
I could not agree more. Okay. And there are many variables that affect let's say, the risk averseness of different people. Okay. If you have an organization where people are really scared to make mistakes, that's a recipe for disaster. Okay. Now, how do you deal with it? You deal with it by some kind of education. Okay. You have, starting with the upper level of management, you have to work with them and let them understand that they have to communicate throughout their organization, the people that work with them, that sensible risk is okay, as long as it's not suicidal, of course. Okay. Because if people refuse to take any risk, they will not be able to get you what you want at the end, in the long run. After all, whatever a new organization or even an established organization is doing, if they're not going through the process of trial and error, they deprive themselves of the iterative progression, right? So it is important the organization learn, codify a certain level of risk-taking that is sensible, it's balanced. I'm not talking about being totally reckless, okay? But it's very important for upper management to convey this message. Otherwise, people will continue to be very afraid of making suggestions, because they may sound as wishy-washy, or they don't have all the information 100% backing them up. There must be an element of risk-taking, just like Chris was mentioning. He was talking about, some of his engineers are very cautious because he is not an engineer by background, he takes some other risks, right? He's willing to take other risks. I can empathize with what he's talking about, because often what happens with engineers, when we go to school, engineering school takes out of us, the risk-taking element, because everything has to be predictable, okay, has to be quantifiable and sure to maximize the certainty I'm talking about. Real life is not like this, especially when you work in a development situation where you have to come up with a new solution or a new product. You have to be able to take some risk, at least mentally, initially. Does it make sense to you?
Oh, it absolutely does for me. I don't know about the rest of the group. What do you guys think?
Well, I was going to say on the MVP there, I was like, the vision statement itself, the whole vision of something new is the MVP. Because I'll go out there and be like, hey guys, this is what we're gonna do, and they're like, oh, that sounds great. How do we do it? It's like, I don't know. I was hoping you'd help me figure that out. And it's like, oh, it's like, what do you don't have the answer? It's like, no, we're gonna figure it out, right? You
Mhm.
know, like, come on.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's,
Yeah.
I mean, that's definitely the world that I feel like I live in a lot with clients. And so this was, I don't know, this one really stood out to me, and it felt like it hit a lot of the points that we've talked about in the past on some of the other calls. Any other final comments on that one before I move to the next one?
I was what Israel was saying about it, the message coming from maybe higher up or executive level. I completely agree with, because I still remember when I first started here, I heard more stories about how we failed than how we succeeded. And that didn't come from my colleague, my equals. It came from higher up, and just where we are today compared to that. And I think that just allowed me to say, okay, I'm going to take the training wheels off and I'm going to try to ride this bike. And if it doesn't work, I'm going to fall down. And if I fall down, that's okay.
But Chris, I mean, you just kind of sent me down a tangent that reminds me of a lot of things too. I think you're 100% right. I think, what I think some organizations lose to arrogance is the ability to have those mistakes and admit those mistakes. So what I would suggest, and I don't know your organization well enough to know anything about the inner workings, but my guess is there will be a point in the future when you guys are so good at what you're doing, you're so comfortable with it, and you're so much better than everybody else on the market, you start to get arrogant, and that costs you. And I don't know that you guys may correct for it before you ever get there, but I can see that, watch that happen in organizations today where, they're good at being humble while they're still making all those mistakes, but they forget about being humble when they start getting really good with that product or that deliverable.
Shon, you and I know very well one company that has gone through this process. Seriously.
Yes, sir, we do. Absolutely, we do.
Yes.
And you get good at something, right? And then you just get too arrogant. And I'm pretty excited about this. As you can tell, I can't even make a sentence. This arrogance thing is something that I'm facing within my own organization. And, it's something I'm really starting to tackle and attack. And I'm really trying to I don't want to hurt anyone's self-esteem, but by the same token, we have to understand that, while we've gotten really good, that really good is not going to sustain us into the future.
I don't know if it's arrogant. I would call it more complacency.
Complacency in the place of arrogance, you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
I don't think it's too hard to crush that stuff. I mean, if the attitude is always celebratory, always, hey, we did awesome, and you have everybody gets a prize. I don't want to say everybody gets a prize because you're doing great, but that mentality of, hey, we're just going to celebrate the good. You do like the Toyota guys is the best example I can come up with, is they have a awesome launch and then they all sit around the table and be like, we screwed this up, and they throw out everything that was wrong on the table because the focus is on meticulous, perfection rather than, beat the competition or, good launch in the market. It's always like, what was wrong? We screwed this up, guys. We need to fix this, and they dive into that stuff so they can make it even better, but it always keeps that edge, keeps them pushing way forward.
But
Very cool.
Brian, this system of Toyota, of course, it's a work of genius. Whoever came up with it and refined it, it's very, very effective. However, when you look at the products of Toyota, okay, they are not really innovative solutions. They all copy from others.
Right,
They
right.
have very little the twist I was talking about as far as creativity. And that's why, because they are so rigid in their methodology that allows very, very little risk taking. Okay.
Yeah.
And this is so it has brilliant results. We have to give them credit for that,
Yeah.
but also a price to pay.
Yeah, and that makes sense because maybe they're not the greatest example. I wish I had a few more, but that's that mentality. And I've seen it before of,
No,
like, all right, man, we were on the, we did great, but we were on the verge of failure there. And let's tighten this up and make sure it doesn't happen. It's just always looking for just squeezing out that next ounce of success.
Very good. Well, I enjoyed that. I hope you guys did. I've got a couple more here I want to hit in the minutes we have left. And I just kind of picked a couple that I thought were interesting. How many of you are familiar with Occam's razor? Quick show of hands. Okay, good. Let me talk about this one then. I wasn't sure whether to talk about it because I was afraid you guys might have seen it somewhere before, but Occam's razor is that the simplest explanation is likely the most true. And so when you encounter a problem or you look at a data set, the simplest explanation for that data statistically is probably the most true. So this was another model that that a lot of folks are using to, go to keep it simple, to stay simple. They'll KISS thing, right? So if, you see somebody doing something, we want to look at the simplest reason that they might have done that, not the one that comes from our filters and our way of thinking. The quote in here for this one I thought was kind of cutesy wootsy, so I'll read it. When you hear hoofbeats, think of horses, not zebras. And I think that really explains Occam's razor pretty clearly. The chances of it being a zebra are relatively low, but yet sometimes in some situations, do we not think about zebras? Mm-hmm. And so I thought this was a good one. I mean, and Brian, I apologize. This does attack the realm of conspiracy theories.
I was going to say aliens.
Sometimes the simplest answer is the easy answer.
Yeah, definitely. Until it's not.
Until it's not. All right. So Occam's razor. Anybody got any specifics around that one where you've seen that one pop up in the business world?
I was going to say you see that mostly when people are trying to cover something like, let me come up with another example, another possibility, let's complicate this.
Yeah, let's make this harder than it has to be.
Yeah.
Now,
that's not my fault. I'm
a root cause analysis instructor. So to be honest, Occam's razor drives me nuts because a lot of times when we find a solution from an RCA standpoint, we find the solution in the ideas that people hadn't thought of before, because if they had thought of the idea before, then they would have already taken care of it. But, I also get that that's probably a fairly limited data set, that most things quite simply can be solved with 5 whys, or the Toyota folks, Israel, wouldn't have done
it. but Shon, I'm not trying to be difficult here, okay? But I don't necessarily buy into this generalization that most solutions should be simple or come from simple, thinking. If at the risk of generalizing, I would say that different solutions require or are associated with different levels of complexity. Okay, some of them are extremely simple and obvious, but some of them are extremely complex. And I'm coming back, Chris, to management, okay? Coming from the top, and I've known a couple of people, managers, coming from the top, I want a simple solution to this and this problem. That's nonsense, because you already put the thinking, the imaginative, out-of-the-box thinking in a box. You put too many boundaries around that way of thinking. Okay, so when my inclination is to approach it more open-minded. Some solutions, some problems are very difficult, but some of them are very easy to solve by identifying simple solutions. So I'm not sure that rule is that general.
Well, and I like it. I appreciate the discussion, because a gentleman that was a mentor of mine years ago, he looked at me and he said, we were teaching a statistics class, and he said, all models are wrong. Some models are more useful or more valuable than others. And so the point that I would say is you're absolutely right. I mean, I would agree with you. This is a book of models, and there's a whole bunch of models in here. And I think, you know, while they're all wrong in certain situations, I think the key here is to be able to use the little nugget. So maybe it's not a simple solution, but if I hear, you know, something, instead of immediately thinking of some complex reason why it might have happened, it probably behooves me to look around for the horses instead of the zebras, to use the example we had.
No, I agree. You have to use good judgment, okay, but not to adhere and adopt some kind of dogma and convey to your employees, because once you do that, you know, it's like asking them to be objective. They will try their best to come up with simple solutions, where sometimes there are certain problems that don't, you know, they are not that simple to solve. So,
Right.
So
yeah.
it sounded like Sean, like the statement you're making is more on the observation. Like, don't make the observation so complex that you're trying to figure out what it is. It's probably a simple explanation, but then we could take that simple explanation and turn it into a solution that's very complex, you know, because you're trying to solve something. Maybe it's not a simple answer for a solution.
Well, and I'll go a step further. I believe that, you know, as I said, in my experience with RCA, there are many times that complex solutions and complex understandings are required. And I always think back to one specific RCA that I did with Mercedes-Benz a few years ago, where 5 things had to happen at the same time for this thing to happen above. So for the line to shut down, you had to have the heavy SUV, you had to have the old style carrier, the temperature had to be over 80 degrees, blah. That's the opposite of Occam's razor. But I would venture to bet that 90% of the problems I run into are very simple. When I hear hoofs, they're probably horses. You know, they're not zebras, if you will.
Okay, that's your experience.
Well, and actually, Israel, I think we're on the same page. Maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah.
No, I think so too. I'm just impressed that you're able to put percentages to estimate.
Oh Lord, Israel, don't take my percentages. Don't take my percentages.
I'm thoroughly impressed, you know.
That had air quotes around it. If you didn't see that part, let me put them up here now.
Since we don't have female on the call, you know, I don't have the balls to come up with this percentage, but you know, I give it to you. So.
Hey, that's Leroy Jenkins right there. If you haven't watched it, Google it. There's some percentages there.
All right, I've got one more and then we'll wrap up for the day. And I found this one to be kind of interesting. This was a bit of an eye-opener. When I first saw this one was really right in the middle of the political season. So it really, really rang true with me. And it's called echo chambers. And the model is basically stating that, you know, because, and I'll use the internet to describe it, because you're likely to click on this type of stuff, we're going to show you more of that stuff. Because we show you more of that stuff, you have an availability bias to believe that everyone else thinks the same way that you do. And this one, I mean, it was a pretty big eye opener for me because I can't see a way out. I can't see a way to fix this. I mean, if you go back to old media where you read the newspaper, now the paper had a bias, you know, the writer had a bias, but at least you got some kind of a mixed look at the news that wasn't manipulated based on what your interests were. Now you look at today and we're served up our Twitter feeds. We're served up our, you know, just news on your phone or Facebook or whatever it is. You're only seeing the information that they think you'll click on. So you're never going to see the other side of the story in your feed. And that's concerning to me.
So you mean everybody hasn't been visited by aliens?
Not everybody, Brian. Not everyone. And Brian, I don't want you to tell that story today because we're recording this. So how many of you, I mean, have you thought about that before? And, you know, how does that affect even business communications, marketing, sales, all those sort of things? Because you can use it to your advantage, but it also can be a very negative, very negative implication as well.
Well, I think for us that, you know, when you talk about our core leadership, I think there's different opinions and different people that are in those positions for a reason. So if everybody in our organization believed the same thing, we'd be in trouble because there'd be no pushback, there'd be no anything. And I think that there's a very diverse group. And so no one's reading from the same newspaper, if you will, because there's different ways to look at it. So I'm thankful for that, but it also gives you a chance to voice how you feel too. You know, if you, I mean, my boss has said many times, like, if you don't think this is a good idea, tell me. I'm going to throw out a lot of ideas. And if I'm wrong, tell me. And at first I was like, there's no way he wants me to tell him if that's wrong. But one day, I don't know if I just had, you know, felt snarky or what, I let him have it. And he was like, yeah, all right, we won't do that. I was like, oh, okay, let's do this again. You know, so I think that that's important too, to not surround yourself with everybody who thinks the same way, because that way you can have different, you know, approaches to something.
I think your management is, that manager is very, very strong personality, because what I've seen over the years, people that are either professionally or personally insecure with themselves, they would generally tend to bring in people and retain them that cater to their opinions and egos.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So I think you're very fortunate.
Mm-hmm. I think
to
so
have
too.
a diverse, a group that is allowed to have different opinions
Mm-hmm.
and different, you know, recommendations.
Well, Israel, you and I talked about this, and I've talked about it earlier on this call today. Again, it goes back to being comfortable to have that dissenting opinion, right? It doesn't mean the boss man's going to listen to you every time you say it, but at least you've got the ability to vocalize that so that he doesn't assume that everything he's hearing is leading him down the path to potential ruin, right? So
Yeah.
I love what you said there, Chris. It really brought that back to, you know, what I would expect to see in a lot of organizations. And if you can't have that open communication, and Israel, you and I talked specifically about one that we know of, where, you know, you couldn't necessarily be open, and if you were, there's a pretty good chance you were going to be run out on a rail.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, but Sean, here's the quandary, and the quandary is for the subordinates, the employees that work for this management structure. Okay. And these people, this employee can be very talented, have a lot of initiative, at least initially, and so on. Okay. But if the structure does not allow that diversity of opinions and recommendations, they may end up paying a very heavy penalty, okay, for being professionally honest with themselves and the company that employs them, right? So the question, and that's a challenge, you work with many different companies. How you, Sean, come to a company and say, you know, you guys, you're sitting here at the table, 10 brilliant people, but you're too rigid. You don't let your employees, are you going to say that? I don't think so. You see? And it ends up being glossed over, and this kind of behavior and this kind of culture continues to be maintained and propagated. That's the problem.
Yeah.
know? That is the problem. And by
Well,
the
when
way,
I initially go ahead,
yeah.
sorry.
What I'm thinking about is when I had the opportunity and pleasure to work with Germans, okay, in Germany. We were involved with the project on the Audi A8. And maybe I told you that story before. sometimes they would get together and in a room, and they did not necessarily agree. And they had fierce arguments among themselves. Sometimes people would run out of the room, the veins would pop out, and so on. But at the end of the session, the director or manager listened to everybody and made a decision. But he allowed those opinions to be voiced up, to be heard. What I've seen in our culture, if this is done, many times there are consequences, and those are not necessarily very positive consequences to the individuals that express themselves honestly. So the question is, how do you deal with that?
Well, that is definitely an interesting one, Israel, because it's something that I've noticed from, and I do get the benefit of really getting to know different clients as I go through. And the German company that I mentioned earlier very much argued. I saw, the next popping out and the yelling and screaming, but they did get to a point and they were able to move forward. Now, I do have other clients that I work with where if you raised your voice at all, I think you'd probably be sent to HR.
Absolutely.
Right?
And that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So they never have those discussions. And I think for the sake of being polite, they never challenge. So, maybe this echo chamber is more prevalent than I ever really thought about when I read this section of the book.
It is
Yeah, people get upset when you challenge them.
Prevalent.
Yep.
It's very prevalent. I'm sorry, but at least in our culture, it's very prevalent. An organization like Chris was describing, I'm really encouraged to hear that there are organizations that practice that. That echo chamber is really deadly if it's not properly controlled. Okay, diversity is very important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, so that's my three. What do you guys think? I mean, having a discussion about some of these ever so often, is this good? Does it make you think?
Yeah, it seems like good information. I mean, it's always good to, even if you've heard it before, get a little reminder, but if you haven't, it kind of opens your eyes. That's what we want to do, is we want to challenge what people are thinking about and bring a couple extra tools. And you may not have a bunch, but at least one more before you leave.
Well, very good. So just as a reminder for everyone, here's the book that I was pulling those from. We may pull them up a few more. I mean, this book's really thick and we only talked about 3, which is maybe 10 pages in the whole book. So there is just a ton of them in here. So I'll keep this handy, and if we like it, we'll continue to do it. If we don't, we'll nix it. Nobody won't hurt my feelings. So, but I think I mean I love hearing what you guys are seeing in your organizations and what you've seen in the past in some organizations that you and I share. So it helps me to understand a little bit where you're coming from on those. So that's what I had, Brian.
Yeah, no, awesome. I love it. We didn't really get to go over, what we had talked about in the previous one. So for you guys, if you pull up the recording from last time and just kind of get, when we started, throwing stuff on the wall and saying, what should this look like? You'll get a bit of a sense of kind of where we're going, but it's really centered around the leadership, mentorship, and continuous improvement, those things that are kind of missing out there in a lot of places today. And then, continuing some presentations, continue to talk about, some books and everything, but then really just solving problems together. So if you guys run into a problem at your own place of employment or, your own project that you're working on, feel free to bring it next time and throw it on the table and say, okay, can we challenge this one? Can we find a solution to this one? Because that's really what that first half of today was, when there's an incentive not to work, how do we get people to work? And it's really good comments came out of this one. So for Ben and Carrie, if you guys are out there, listening to it, hopefully that helps, and we'll pick up with you guys again next time. Other than that, that's really it, guys. So really appreciate you coming.
Thank you, everybody. Enjoyed the time with you.
And actually, before I let you go, feedback time. right? So we've been doing this since October. Has it been October? It's 8 months. It's
Yeah,
been
I think
about
it
eight
has.
months,
Yeah.
right? And we've had some mixed engagement and kind of a core group that comes and everything. What are we missing? What do we need to get out there? Do we need to have weekly touches, daily touches, just kind of things put out there, just as a reminder? Would that be valuable? And I don't mean like emails and spam and things like that, but maybe little posts on LinkedIn. What would help keep this in front of everybody? Think about it. You can get back to me next time.
Very good.
Yeah, yeah.
Very good. Excellent. Well, thank you, everybody. I enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing everybody again here soon.
All right.
All right,
See you
thanks,
guys.
Bye, guys.
Bye bye.